By 2019, tensions between the United States and Iran were rising once again. The fragile balance that had held for years was beginning to break. At the center of the growing conflict was the collapse of a landmark international agreement known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Signed in 2015 between Iran and several world powers, the agreement aimed to limit Iran's nuclear program in exchange for relief from international sanctions. Supporters believed the deal would reduce the risk of nuclear proliferation and open a path toward diplomacy. But critics argued that it did not go far enough. In 2018, the United States, under Donald Trump, withdrew from the agreement. Washington reimposed severe economic sanctions on Iran. The policy became known as the Maximum Pressure Campaign. The sanctions targeted Iran's banking system, oil exports, and major industries. Almost immediately, the Iranian economy began to suffer. Oil exports dropped dramatically. The national currency lost much of its value. Inflation soared, and unemployment increased. For Iran's leadership, the sanctions were seen as economic warfare. For the United States, they were intended to force Iran back to the negotiating table. But instead of reducing tensions, the pressure appeared to escalate them. Throughout 2019, a series of mysterious attacks targeted oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. Several ships were damaged in explosions. The United States accused Iran of being responsible.
Iran dénie d'involvement.
Then, in June 2019, another major incident pushed the two countries closer to confrontation. Iran shot down an American surveillance drone over the Strait of Hormuz. The drone was a Northrop Grumman RQ-4 Global Hawk, one of the most advanced reconnaissance aircraft in the U.S. military. Iran claimed the drone had violated its airspace. The United States insisted it was flying in international airspace. The incident shocked military planners in Washington. For a brief moment, the world stood on the edge of open conflict. President Trump reportedly approved retaliatory airstrikes. But just minutes before they were launched, the operation was called off. The decision prevented immediate escalation. However, the underlying tensions continued to grow. And by late 2019, Iraq had become the central stage for this dangerous rivalry. Iraq had long been caught between the influence of two powerful countries. On one side stood the United States, which had maintained a military presence in Iraq since the 2003 invasion. On the other side stood Iran, which had built deep political and military connections across Iraqi society. Many powerful militia groups inside Iraq were closely aligned with Tehran. One of the most significant of these groups was Kataib Hezbollah. The United States accused this militia of carrying out rocket attacks against American bases. Through much of 2019, these attacks became more frequent. Missiles struck bases where U.S. troops were stationed. Most caused limited damage, but they sent a clear message. Tensions were rising. Then, in December 2019, a rocket attack struck a military base near Kirkuk. The attack killed an American civilian contractor. The United States blamed Kataib Hezbollah. Within days, American forces launched retaliatory airstrikes against militia targets in Iraq and Syria. The strikes killed several fighters. The response immediately triggered anger among militia supporters. Soon after, thousands of protesters gathered outside the United States Embassy Baghdad. The embassy compound was one of the largest diplomatic facilities in the world. Protesters stormed its outer perimeter. They set fires and chanted anti-American slogans. For several hours, the situation appeared dangerously close to becoming another hostage crisis. Memories of the Iran hostage crisis quickly resurfaced in Washington. American officials feared that the embassy could be overrun. Additional U.S. troops were deployed to protect the facility. The protests eventually subsided, but the message had been received loud and clear. The conflict between the United States and Iran was no longer limited to political rhetoric. It was unfolding in real time on Iraqi soil. And behind the scenes, American intelligence agencies were closely tracking one man they believed played a key role in coordinating these regional networks. That man was Qasem Soleimani. Inside Washington, the situation was being closely monitored. Military leaders, intelligence analysts, and political advisors were debating how to respond. According to U.S. officials, intelligence reports suggested that Iranian-backed groups were planning additional attacks on American personnel. Some officials believed stronger action was necessary. Others warned that escalating the conflict could trigger a wider war. Several military options were presented to President Trump. These ranged from limited strikes against militia groups to more aggressive actions targeting Iranian leadership. Among the options discussed was the possibility of targeting Qasem Soleimani himself. For years, Soleimani had been one of the most influential figures in Iran's military strategy. He commanded the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force. The Quds Force was responsible for operations outside Iran's borders. Under Soleimani's leadership, it had built networks of allied militias across the Middle East. American officials blamed these groups for numerous attacks on U.S. forces. Some analysts described Soleimani as the architect of Iran's regional strategy. Targeting him would send a powerful message. But it would also carry enormous risk. Killing such a high-ranking military commander could provoke direct retaliation from Iran. For decades, both countries had avoided killing each other's top officials. Breaking that precedent would represent a dramatic escalation. Despite the risks, the option remained on the table. Then, in early January 2020, intelligence agencies reported that Soleimani was planning to travel to Iraq. The information created a rare opportunity. After intense internal discussions, the decision was made. The United States would strike. On the night of January 2, 2020, intelligence agencies were closely monitoring movements in the region. Qasem Soleimani boarded a commercial flight in Damascus, Syria. His destination was Baghdad. Shortly after midnight, the plane landed at Baghdad International Airport. Soleimani was greeted by Iraqi militia leader Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. Muhandis was a senior figure in the Popular Mobilization Forces, a coalition of militias operating in Iraq. The two men entered a convoy of vehicles leaving the airport. High above them, an American drone was already in position. The aircraft was an MQ-9 Reaper, equipped with precision-guided missiles. The drone had been tracking the convoy's movements. As the vehicles drove away from the airport, the final authorization was given. Moments later, missiles were launched. The weapons struck the convoy with devastating force. The explosions destroyed the vehicles almost instantly. Within minutes, reports began circulating that Qasem Soleimani had been killed. Soon afterward, the Pentagon confirmed the operation. The statement said the strike had been ordered to prevent future attacks against American personnel. But the consequences of the operation were only beginning. News of the strike spread across the world within hours. In Iran, the reaction was immediate and emotional. Millions of people would soon take to the streets to mourn Soleimani. In Washington, politicians argued fiercely over the legality and wisdom of the strike. And across the Middle East, military forces prepared for what many feared could be the start of a new war. The death of Qasem Soleimani had changed the strategic landscape overnight. Now the world waited to see how Iran would respond. Because everyone knew one thing for certain. Tehran would not remain silent.